Our story begins with a scene featuring the protagonist, a young noble named Wendelin Baumeister. At the same time, several enemies suddenly appear before him. Without hesitation, Wendelin gathers a massive amount of magical energy into his hands. Moments later, he unleashes a devastating blast that instantly destroys every enemy standing in his way. Not long after, a man named Roderick arrives and informs Wendelin that all preparations have finally been completed. Because of that, the work can officially begin. Soon, countless laborers start carrying out their duties, while one of the workers comments that the Count's magic has greatly increased the speed of construction. Through this, we learn that Wendelin himself holds the title of Count, despite still being very young. After finishing his tasks, Wendelin tells Roderick that he plans to head back home. A moment later, he activates teleportation magic and instantly returns to his mansion. Upon arriving, we are introduced to Elise, the daughter of a cardinal who is admired by many people as a holy saint. She arrives carrying tea for Wendelin, and the two quietly spend some time together. Soon after, the anime introduces another girl named Louise Brandt, the daughter of one of Duke Blenheard's retainers. Alongside her is Louise Bake, a talented fighter who specializes in close combat techniques. We are then introduced to Erwin von Alnem, making it immediately obvious that almost everyone in this world has incredibly complicated names. While talking with Wendelin, one of the girls jokingly tells him that he looks more like Roderick's overworked servant than an actual noble. Wendelin casually responds that regardless of how much power he possesses, deep down he still feels like nothing more than a regular office employee. However, the girls become confused because they have absolutely no idea what an office worker even is. A short while later, Wendelin excuses himself and says that he is going to take a bath. As he leaves the room, he quietly reflects on the fact that 10 years earlier, he truly had been an ordinary office worker. The story then shifts into the past. Before being transported into this fantasy world, Wendelin's real name was Shingo Ichinomiya. One evening, Shingo is shown preparing dinner for himself like usual. However, while eating, his vision suddenly becomes distorted, causing him to collapse moments later. When he regains consciousness, he discovers something impossible. His body has somehow transformed into that of a 5-year-old child. Completely confused and unable to understand the situation, Shingo panics as he looks around. At the same time, he notices that he is surrounded by people attending an extravagant wedding ceremony. Everything around him feels unbelievably realistic, making him wonder if this is simply some kind of strange dream. Believing that he only needs to wake up, he closes his eyes and desperately tries to snap himself out of it. Unfortunately, his father suddenly interrupts him and tells him to properly greet the guests attending the celebration. Soon after, his father brings him around to introduce him to the nobles present at the wedding. However, Wendelin becomes so overwhelmed by nervousness that he cannot even speak properly. Thankfully, a young man soon steps in to help him. We then learn that this person is Erich Baumeister, Wendelin's older brother in this new world. Erich politely introduces him to everyone by his full name, Wendelin von Benno Baumeister. At that moment, the truth finally hits him. Shingo realizes that he has somehow reincarnated into another world and inherited the identity of a young noble named Wendelin. A little later, Wendelin asks Erich about the celebration taking place around them. Erich explains that although it may still be difficult for a child his age to fully understand, the event they are attending is actually the wedding ceremony of their older brother, Kurt. He then explains that Kurt's bride is Amalie, the second daughter of the respected Maybach family. Erich also mentions that their father struggled greatly to arrange a marriage for Kurt, so everyone is relieved that another noble family has finally agreed to join their household through marriage. After hearing all of this, Wendelin becomes curious and asks whether marrying into their family automatically grants someone noble status as well. Erich quickly explains that there is no need for anyone marrying into the family to gain noble status because they are already nobles from the start. Hearing this leaves Wendelin stunned. He never expected that after reincarnating, he would not only become a child again, but also be born into an aristocratic household. Not long afterward, Wendelin realizes that despite being transported into another world, he can still understand the language perfectly. Because of that, he begins thinking that his new life may not be so bad after all. Since he is only one of the younger sons in the family, he assumes he will probably live comfortably without ever needing to struggle for money. Unfortunately, that fantasy immediately falls apart the next morning. When breakfast is served, Wendelin is horrified to see that the meal consists of nothing more than stale bread and a tiny portion of soup. Completely confused, he cannot understand how a family that held such an extravagant wedding banquet the previous day could suddenly be eating food this poor. Curious, he asks where Eric is, only to learn that his brother went out fishing early in the morning. A little later, Wendelin heads outside to meet him and demands an explanation about what is really happening. Eric then reveals the harsh truth. According to him, the luxurious wedding banquet was simply a performance meant to preserve the family's image because they cannot allow outsiders to discover how broke they truly are. To make matters worse, he even points out that parts of their mansion are already beginning to crumble apart. Eric then casually explains that now the celebration is over, their meals will once again return to diluted soup and rye bread every day. After hearing that, Wendelin starts wondering if being born into nobility even has any advantages at all. He assumes that at the very least, important heirs like Kurt or Eric should benefit somehow from their status. However, before he can continue thinking about it, another of his brothers suddenly appears. His name is Helmut. Eric asks whether the hunting trip was successful, but Helmut sadly admits that he failed to catch anything. At that moment, Wendelin starts realizing just how enormous this family actually is. Aside from Eric and Kurt, he learns about another brother named Paul as well. The more siblings he discovers, the more anxious he becomes. As if things were not already bad enough, yet another brother soon arrives, introducing himself as Herman. While talking with everyone, Eric casually mentions that two more brothers, Walter and Carl, were unable to attend the wedding ceremony. The moment Wendelin hears this, panic instantly fills his mind because he finally understands the truth. With so many older brothers and even several half-brothers ahead of him, he is nothing more than the eighth son in line within the Baumeister family. Later on, Wendelin is shown studying a map of the kingdom. Through this, we learn that he currently lives in the kingdom of Helmut. He explains that the nation's capital city is called Estockburg, a massive city populated by over 1 million residents. He then continues describing the surrounding territories. To the south lies the Duchy of Blainroder, home to the largest commercial district in the southern region. Beyond that area is the Baumeister domain itself, the remote territory where Wendelin and his family currently reside. As Wendelin looks over the land surrounding their estate, he points out how underdeveloped it is, mentioning that the population barely reaches 800 people. Shortly afterward, he leaves the mansion while bitterly thinking about how disastrous his reincarnated life has turned out to be. In the distance, he notices several of his brothers saying farewell to their mother before leaving. Confused by the situation, Wendelin quickly runs over to his brothers and asks why they are preparing to leave. They explain that after Kurt's marriage, they agreed to abandon their rights to the family inheritance in exchange for a small amount of money. Because of that decision, they are no longer recognized as nobles. Hearing this deeply worries Wendelin, but his brothers remain optimistic about the future. They explain that they intend to travel to the capital city and start over from scratch. Their plan is to study reading and writing so they can hopefully work as soldiers or government officials someday. If that fails, they still have the option of surviving as adventurers. Before leaving, Eric offers Wendelin a few encouraging words, trying to motivate him despite their difficult circumstances. Not long afterward, the brothers finally depart from the estate. Later that day, Wendelin spends time inside the family library searching through different books, only to discover that almost every single one of them is painfully boring. While looking around, several old documents suddenly fall from one of the shelves. Among them, he notices a strange manual titled Crystal Ball of Magical Aptitude Guide. At first, Wendelin laughs to himself because he cannot imagine magic actually existing in this world. Even so, curiosity eventually gets the better of him, so he starts reading the guide. According to the book, every human possesses mana, but only one person out of 1,000 is born with enough magical energy to properly cast spells. After reading that, Wendelin initially assumes there is no reason to bother trying. Despite that, he still places the crystal ball onto the desk and continues reading further. The guide then explains that magical talent is not inherited through bloodlines, meaning anyone can potentially be born with extraordinary magic regardless of family status. Wendelin finds the explanation hard to believe and thinks it sounds more like a fantasy story for children. Still, out of curiosity, he places both of his hands onto the crystal ball to test it himself. For several moments, absolutely nothing happens. Thinking the whole thing is nonsense, he prepares to leave the room. But just as he begins standing up, the crystal ball suddenly emits a brilliant light. Elsewhere, a man named Alfred Rainford instantly senses the appearance of an enormous magical presence. We soon learn that Alfred is a former court mage who once served the Duchy of Blainroder. Back in the library, Wendelin stares at the glowing crystal in complete disbelief. He quickly resumes reading the guide and discovers that anyone capable of making the crystal shine possesses exceptional talent for magic. Because of that, the manual strongly recommends finding an experienced magic instructor as soon as possible. Unfortunately for Wendelin, that recommendation is the end of the guide. Desperate to learn more, he immediately searches the library for books related to magic. However, instead of spellbooks, he only finds collections of romantic poetry hidden among the shelves. Not long after, Wendelin's father walks into the room. Hoping for answers, Wendelin asks whether there are any additional books available. His father bluntly replies that there are none, before ordering him to head into the forest and collect firewood. After saying that, he casually leaves the room. Sometime later, Wendelin is shown wandering through the forest while repeatedly attempting to use magic on his own. Unsurprisingly, he has no clue how magic actually works, so every attempt fails miserably. Eventually, he grows frustrated and nearly gives up completely. Suddenly, an unfamiliar voice asks if he is the boy who has been practicing magic. Wendelin immediately freezes in shock after seeing an old man descend from the sky. Terrified by the sight, he can barely react. To ease his fear, the old man calmly introduces himself as Alfred and explains that he is a mage. A moment later, Alfred casually snatches the branch Wendelin was holding and throws it deep into the forest. Unfortunately, the branch lands near a rocky slope, causing several stones to collapse onto a giant wild boar nearby. The two quickly move closer to investigate what happened. However, the moment they arrive, they realize the boar is still alive. Worse yet, the enraged creature has already spotted them and is now preparing to charge straight at them. The giant wild boar slowly circles around them while glaring aggressively, causing Wendelin to panic in fear. Unable to stay calm, he immediately tries to run away. However, Alfred quickly stops him and explains that magic cannot be used properly without visualization. According to Alfred, Wendelin must first sense the mana flowing within his body and guide that energy throughout himself. As Wendelin concentrates, magical energy finally begins reacting for the first time. Moments later, he successfully releases a wind spell toward the wild boar. Alfred instantly praises him for managing to cast magic on his very first attempt, though Wendelin himself is still too confused to fully process what just happened. Right afterward, Alfred calmly steps forward to deal with the creature personally. With a single spell, he sends the giant boar crashing violently through several trees, killing it instantly. Afterward, Alfred properly introduces himself and reveals that Wendelin's magical talent far surpasses his own abilities. The story then cuts to Wendelin eating with his family at the dining table while they serve him a drink. After taking a look at it, Wendelin jokingly asks if they accidentally gave him plain hot water instead of tea because it barely resembles tea at all. His mother immediately scolds him for making such ridiculous comments. Sometime later, Wendelin meets Alfred again. The two spend time drinking tea together, and Wendelin quickly notices that Alfred's tea actually tastes like real tea, unlike the poor quality drink served back at his home. Not long afterward, Wendelin watches Alfred hunt an animal in the forest. To his surprise, the dead creature suddenly disappears through magic and gets stored inside a tiny bag Alfred carries around with him. After sitting down nearby, Alfred finally reveals that he intends to teach Wendelin how to use magic properly. Wendelin becomes surprised and quickly asks why Alfred would willingly train him despite the fact that he has no money to pay for lessons. Alfred simply responds that payment is unnecessary before standing back up. Moments later, Alfred casts a spell that recalls the same branch he threw away during their first meeting near the wild boar. Once the branch returns to his hand, Alfred formally asks Wendelin to become his disciple. Without hesitation, Wendelin immediately accepts the offer and promises that he will work hard to master magic. From that point onward, he also begins referring to Alfred as his master. Alfred then informs him that their training will officially begin the following day, but there is one important condition. Everything must remain completely secret. Confused, Wendelin asks why they need to hide it. Alfred then explains the dangerous reality behind his magical talent. If the Baumeister family discovers that Wendelin possesses extraordinary magic, many people would immediately start viewing him as a potential heir to lead the family in the future. That alone could trigger conflicts over inheritance and political power within the household. As their conversation continues, Alfred makes it clear that powerful mages hold incredible value in society. In fact, Wendelin's abilities could easily allow him to surpass his older brothers and steal the family inheritance entirely. However, Alfred warns that such attention would place a dangerous burden on a young child like him. Because of that, keeping his abilities hidden is the safest option. The next day, Wendelin officially begins his magic lessons with Alfred. Alfred explains that their first exercise involves synchronizing their mana together, a unique training method used by mages to stabilize magical power between master and student. Wendelin becomes shocked after realizing that this technique temporarily allows his power level to match Alfred's own. Soon after, Alfred instructs him to stretch out his hands and carefully focus on circulating mana around them. Wendelin follows the instructions exactly, and almost immediately a magical connection forms between the two. The moment this happens, Wendelin becomes overwhelmed after sensing the sheer amount of magical energy flowing from Alfred. Meanwhile, elsewhere inside the mansion, Wendelin's father quietly notices that the magical crystal sphere has been moved from its original position. Not long afterward, Kurt arrives, and the two begin laughing while imagining Wendelin secretly testing the crystal because he dreamed of becoming a mage. Kurt even jokes that Wendelin probably cried afterward once he realized he lacked any magical talent. Several days pass, and Wendelin continues training under Alfred every single day. By this point, he has already succeeded in learning how to use fire magic properly. Only a few days into the training, Alfred praises Wendelin for progressing far faster than expected. Wendelin honestly admits that none of this would have been possible without Alfred's guidance, because before meeting him, he knew absolutely nothing about magic. Not long afterward, Alfred hands Wendelin a basket filled with vegetables and tells him to bring them home. Since Wendelin had already told his family that he was searching for food in the forest, the gift becomes the perfect excuse. That evening, Wendelin's entire family is overjoyed while eating the meal, because it has been ages since they last tasted food this good. His father becomes suspicious and asks where a small child like Wendelin managed to find such fresh vegetables. He jokingly comments that maybe Wendelin used magic to get them, causing the others to burst into laughter. However, unlike everyone else, Eric quietly starts wondering whether Wendelin truly possesses magical abilities. Several days later, Alfred takes Wendelin high into the sky while using wind magic to fly. During the flight, Alfred explains that mastering wind magic allows a mage to move freely through the air. He also mentions that if Wendelin continues improving, he will eventually be capable of flying on his own someday. While they are traveling, Wendelin suddenly notices a large bird flying nearby. Thinking quickly, he tosses a rock upward and uses his magic to alter its direction mid-air. The rock flies straight toward the creature and successfully knocks it down. Soon afterward, the two prepare the bird as a meal. While eating together, Wendelin shows Alfred a plant resembling wasabi that he discovered deeper inside the forest. Alfred appreciates the gift, but he immediately warns Wendelin never to wander too far into the wilderness, because terrifying monsters exist there, creatures so dangerous that ordinary humans stand no chance against them. As they continue talking, Wendelin admits that he has started feeling uneasy because it seems like his brother may secretly be observing him. Alfred calmly responds that Eric has probably begun suspecting that Wendelin can use magic. Hearing that leaves Wendelin troubled because he no longer knows how he should handle the situation. To reassure him, Alfred suggests another possible future. He explains that Wendelin could choose to become an adventurer instead. Alfred then reveals that he himself once lived as an adventurer in the past, and he believes that career would suit Wendelin perfectly. However, in the middle of their conversation, something unusual suddenly happens. A strange, dark, magical aura begins leaking out from Alfred's arm. Alfred immediately notices it and quietly worries to himself, thinking that this should not be happening yet. Despite this disturbing moment, the anime still refuses to explain what exactly is wrong with him. Later that night, Wendelin announces to his family that he wants to become an adventurer someday. His father does not object to the idea at all. However, he explains that the family is far too poor to afford tuition for an adventurer academy. Because of that, Wendelin will have to earn the necessary money on his own if he truly wishes to pursue that dream. The following day, Alfred explains where the Adventurer Academy is located. Afterward, he tells Wendelin that one of the most important skills he must learn is travel magic, along with the ability to fly. According to Alfred, mastering those techniques would allow him to cross enormous distances within a very short amount of time. Immediately after saying that, Alfred grabs Wendelin and launches into the sky at incredible speed. As they soar above the clouds, Wendelin is left speechless after witnessing a breathtaking view of nearly the entire continent stretching beneath them. In the next scene, we see Alfred during the night trying to control the dark magic leaking out from his body, and he looks even more worried than before. Several days later, Wendelin finally manages to fly a little on his own, and Alfred tells him that his training is almost finished. Wendelin becomes worried because he feels that he is still not ready yet, but Alfred replies that he already knows the basics, so all he needs now is more practice. Alfred then tells him that he is finally ready. Later that night, Wendelin's family is having dinner when his father mentions that people have seen a talking dead man. He explains that it is a type of zombie that eats humans, has no consciousness, and possesses an ice-cold body. As soon as Wendelin hears this, he immediately thinks about Alfred. A little later, he rushes into the forest to look for him. Wendelin quickly tells Alfred that they have already spotted a talking corpse and begs him to help. To Wendelin's surprise, Alfred confesses that he himself is one of those undead beings. He then explains that 5 years ago, the Duke's eldest son suffered from an incurable disease. Because of that, the Duke traveled into the Forest of Evil in search of a medicine capable of curing any illness. And since Alfred was his personal mage, he had to accompany him. Soon after, we see a flashback where the Duke brought 2,000 soldiers in order to defeat one of the monsters living in the forest. Alfred's role was to protect the soldiers and attack the monsters. However, there were simply too many creatures, and Alfred eventually lost his life during the battle. Back in the present, Alfred calmly explains that talking corpses can finally rest in peace once their final wish is fulfilled. His own wish is for someone to inherit all of the magic and knowledge he accumulated during 30 years of training. That is the real reason why Alfred was drawn to Wendelin's magic the very first time he sensed it. Finally, Alfred tells Wendelin that there is one final test to determine whether he is truly the person he has been searching for. Alfred explains that the final test will be for Wendelin to purify him. Because of that, Alfred begins teaching him how to use holy magic, since it is the type of magic used to purge undead creatures. Right after that, Alfred carefully explains what Wendelin must do in order to use holy magic. He tells him that he needs to convert his life energy into magical power. At that moment, the two hold hands, and Wendelin begins focusing his energy into Alfred, causing Alfred's soul to slowly become purified. However, when Wendelin notices that Alfred is in pain, he hesitates and can no longer continue. Alfred then encourages him and reminds him not to forget everything he learned from him. With tears in his eyes, Wendelin thanks Alfred before finally casting the holy spell that gradually purifies him. Alfred slowly begins fading away little by little. Just before disappearing completely, Alfred tells Wendelin never to stop working hard and continuing to improve himself. Several years later, we see that Wendelin has grown much older. He says goodbye to his mother and Amali before leaving. In the next scene, we arrive at the Adventurer Academy, where we once again see the girls from the beginning, along with Wendelin inside the classroom. Wendelin thinks to himself that he felt extremely lonely for the past 7 years because he spent all that time distancing himself from others, so nobody would discover that he could use magic. While Wendelin is thinking about this, the students in the classroom begin introducing themselves one by one, because it is their first day of classes. Each student states their name and the family they come from. Wendelin nervously thinks that because of all the years he spent alone, he has become somewhat antisocial. Eventually, it becomes Wendelin's turn to introduce himself. Feeling highly motivated, he confidently presents himself in front of the class, but he quickly becomes disappointed after noticing that everyone is staring at him like he is extremely strange. Soon after, the teacher hands the students a paper where they must write down the names of the people they want to work with. However, because Wendelin is not very social, he has no idea what to do. A little later, we see him eating lunch completely alone. At the same time, Louise and Ina observe him while commenting that very few people like him receive a scholarship at the academy. They also mention hearing rumors that Wendelin's magic is already at the level of top adventurers. At that moment, we understand that Wendelin is highly gifted when it comes to magic. Soon after, a young man appears, and we learn that his name is Erwin von Alnim. He tells the girls that Wendelin is completely overpowered and that people even say the teachers have nothing left to teach him. Right after that, Erwin suggests that they should form a group together and try to get Wendelin's attention. He explains that he specializes in swordsmanship, while the girls are skilled with spears and martial arts. Louise thinks it is a great idea, but Ina feels a little unsure about it. Meanwhile, Wendelin becomes very nervous because he wants to socialize with the others. Gathering up his courage, he offers some of his spices to the students around him. At the same time, Erwin and the girls are interrupted when another group of students approaches them. The newcomers claim that they will recruit Wendelin before anyone else can. They all begin laughing together, and from a distance, Wendelin assumes they are simply having fun, not realizing that they are actually competing over him. Because of that, he decides it would be better not to bother them. A little later, the class resumes, and the teacher explains that some families did not send money for their children's expenses. Because of that, the students will have to earn their own money, and the teacher recommends hunting in groups to make it easier. This leaves Wendelin feeling very depressed because he notices that everyone already has a group except for him. Meanwhile, Erwin's group debates whether or not they should invite him because they do not want to disappoint him or make themselves look desperate. Because of this, Wendelin is actually so respected by the other students that they become afraid to invite him into their groups, believing that he would simply reject them. Several hours later, we see the students returning from hunting. Erwin's group congratulates each other because their sword skills allowed them to catch several animals. However, Wendelin suddenly interrupts them and approaches the buyer purchasing the hunting prey. Right after that, Wendelin opens the magical bag he inherited from Alfred before his death, and pulls out several enormous monsters, making everyone else's hunting results look insignificant in comparison. After witnessing this, the group of students who challenged Erwin immediately says that they should give up because they have no chance of getting Wendelin to accept them as companions. All of this causes the students to become extremely disappointed in themselves, and they slowly begin leaving the area. Just after the buyer pays Wendelin, he turns around to invite everyone out to eat, but by that point, all of them have already left. Later that night, Erwin and the girls talk about how difficult their lives have been. Just like Wendelin, their families restricted them from properly learning magic, forcing them to secretly train on their own so their families would not discover their abilities. After hearing this, Ina becomes highly motivated and declares that she will hunt many monsters so Wendelin will finally notice her. The following day, Erwin's group sneaks deep into the forest despite the area being forbidden because of the extremely dangerous monsters living there. Soon after, Ina hears wolves approaching them, so the group prepares to fight. However, within moments, they suddenly find themselves surrounded by a massive pack of wolves. At the same time, in another scene, Wendelin uses his tracking magic and successfully detects both the wolves and the students being surrounded. He immediately thinks that if he helps them, they might finally become his friends. Because of that, he uses his wind magic and quickly flies toward their location. Meanwhile, the students are desperately fighting against the wolves, but because there are simply too many of them, Erwin eventually gets injured. At that moment, the group lowers their guard, and just as the wolves are about to attack again, Wendelin suddenly arrives and saves them by using his earth magic to create a massive rock barrier that protects everyone. A little later, the students return to the academy and apologize to Wendelin because their attempt to get his attention ended up causing trouble for him instead. They also tell him that they will continue trying to impress him so he will eventually join their group. Wendelin tries to respond, but they do not allow him to speak before they are suddenly interrupted by Professor Siegfried. He informs all of the scholarship students that they have been invited to a garden party hosted by Duke Blainroder. The students immediately become excited because they will finally have the opportunity to meet the Duke himself. A little later, the students talk about the huge opportunity they have been given by attending the party. However, one of the students points out that they will most likely just be background guests because the Duke is probably only interested in Wendelin. Even so, Louise still remains hopeful and tells Erwin and Ina that they should buy elegant clothes so the Duke might notice them as well. Several days later, the Grand Garden Party finally begins, and we are introduced to Duke Blainroder. At that moment, one of the servants whispers something into the Duke's ear. Soon after, the Duke begins walking toward the students, causing the girls to believe that he is approaching them. However, the Duke walks straight past them and stops directly in front of Wendelin. He introduces himself as Amadeus Blindrotter and thanks Wendelin for attending the party because it is extremely rare for a member of the Baumeister family to attend one of his events. Wendelin then explains that his family's financial situation has not been very good lately, so the Duke understands because traveling across the mountain ranges to reach the academy is very expensive. Soon after, the Duke asks Wendelin if he could spare some time because he wishes to discuss something important with him. Wendelin agrees, but he asks for permission to bring other people along with him. He then explains that he wants Erwin, Ina, and Louise to come with him as his group. This immediately leaves the three of them completely shocked. Right after that, they all head toward the Duke's mansion. Upon arriving, they are introduced to a man named Brantag. The Duke explains that Brantag is the court mage and also mentions that he was once the apprentice of Alfred Rainford's master. These words instantly shock Wendelin. Brantag then tells him that he has been following Alfred's traces because he specializes in tracking magic. He further explains that Alfred's magical presence suddenly disappeared 7 years ago, so he assumed Alfred had finally passed on peacefully after fulfilling his final wish. Of course, Brantag has no idea that it was actually Wendelin who purified Alfred himself. Soon after, Brantag continues explaining that Alfred was once considered one of the greatest mages on the continent, making it hard for him to believe that Alfred actually found a suitable disciple. Brantag then points out that he finds it suspicious that Wendelin possesses Alfred's magical bag. Brantag also points out that Wendelin comes from the same area where Alfred disappeared. Because of that, he directly asks him if he was Alfred's disciple, and Wendelin honestly answers yes. After confirming that Wendelin was truly Alfred's student, Brantag asks him about Alfred's final moments. Wendelin remembers those painful memories and explains that he was the one who purified Alfred himself. Brantag cannot believe that Alfred allowed a child to carry out such a task. Even so, he sincerely thanks Wendelin because Alfred was finally able to rest in peace thanks to him. Wendelin's eyes begin filling with tears, but he quickly explains that inside Alfred's magical bag are the remains of the 2,000 soldiers who followed him into the Forest of Evil. Wendelin also admits that he had been thinking for a long time about returning them properly. A little later, we see the group outside the Duke's mansion talking about Wendelin. They mention that just like him, they also lived very similar lives because they were forced to hide their powers in order to avoid conflicts within their families. At that moment, Wendelin suddenly runs toward them and apologizes for taking so long. The group then asks him if he was serious about forming a party with them. However, Erwin quickly apologizes because they originally wanted to use Wendelin to improve their own lives. Ina also says that they do not deserve to stand beside someone like him. To everyone's surprise, Wendelin then admits that he actually used them first. He explains that the reason he asked the Duke for permission to bring them along was because he did not want to be alone with such important people. After talking for a little longer, Wendelin asks if he can officially join their group because he truly wants to have friends like them. The others happily agree to become his companions. However, they are suddenly interrupted by the Duke, who tells Wendelin that he forgot to mention something important. Since Wendelin returned the remains of the soldiers, he is entitled to 20% of the reward. Because of that, the Duke plans to send him 1,000 gold coins, leaving the others completely shocked. Finally, Brantag adds that Alfred also owned his own estate, and because Wendelin was his disciple, he will now inherit those lands as well. Sometime later, we see a massive mansion, and inside it, Wendelin is eating dinner alone. He admits that he wishes there were other people living with him, because despite owning such a huge property now, he still feels extremely lonely. 1 week later, we see Wendelin sitting together with Ina, while both of them mention that they are heading toward Eric's wedding. The group travels using a flying ship, and shortly after, Louise appears while proudly saying that her elegant outfit will surely help her attract a nobleman. We also see that Erwin is there as well, but he is absolutely terrified of flying ships because he believes they could suddenly crash at any moment. At the same time, Brantag is also traveling with the group because Wendelin received permission from his brother to invite several friends. Suddenly, a giant cloud appears beside the ship, and Brantag explains that while flying ships normally do not crash, that does not mean they cannot be destroyed by a giant dragon. Right after he says that, a massive skeletal dragon suddenly emerges from the clouds. The passengers aboard the ship immediately become furious with the crew because they were supposedly avoiding areas filled with dangerous monsters. However, the crew members explain that Brantag is already handling the situation. Back with the group, Brantag tells the captain that he cannot defeat the dragon because it is an undead creature that can only be destroyed using holy magic. Since he himself cannot use that kind of magic, he explains that Wendelin is the only one capable of defeating it. Because of that, Wendelin has no choice but to accept. He immediately prepares himself to fight the monster and uses his wind magic to fly into the air. However, the dragon suddenly fires a powerful beam toward him, forcing Wendelin to protect himself with a magical barrier. At the same time, he notices that Brantag is defending the ship from the dragon's attacks. Soon after, Wendelin begins charging a powerful purification spell. After several seconds, he releases a massive beam toward the dragon, purifying its soul and completely destroying it. Brantag then signals for Wendelin to use his magical bag to collect the dragon's bones because they are extremely valuable. At that moment, Wendelin also notices a mysterious gem inside the dragon's body, leaving him completely shocked. A little later, the passengers aboard the ship celebrate their survival, and Brantag tells Wendelin that they can now safely continue toward the capital. Wendelin becomes very excited because he has been looking forward to arriving there and buying many things. Soon after, a man named Arturio Markin appears. Brantag explains that Arturio was once his companion back when he worked as an adventurer. He also mentions that Arturio is now a merchant with many important political connections. Arturio then tells Wendelin that he probably will not be able to buy anything once they arrive. Wendelin becomes confused, but Arturio simply says that he will understand the reason once they reach the capital. The following morning, the group finally arrives at the capital city, and everyone becomes amazed by how massive it is. Soon after, they land safely, and Brantag explains that he has some important matters to handle before quickly leaving the area. Right after that, a knight arrives together with several soldiers from the kingdom's army. The knight tells Wendelin to enter the carriage because His Majesty is waiting for him. After some time, Wendelin arrives at the royal palace. His friends explain that they will go visit Eric, meaning Wendelin will now have to enter alone together with Arturio in order to meet the king. Soon after, they are welcomed and thanked for defeating the giant dragon. Here, we are introduced to the current king of the Helmet Kingdom, whose name is King Helmet. The king explains that because of Wendelin's heroic actions in saving the ship, he will be granted the title of Baron. Wendelin then takes his sword and promises the king that he will use it to protect the kingdom. In the next scene, Wendelin's group is talking with Eric and Brantag. Eric explains that Wendelin will most likely receive the title of Baron, meaning his rank would eventually surpass even their father's. At the same time, the group becomes a little sad because they believe Wendelin might abandon them now. However, Eric explains that since Wendelin does not own enough land to govern a territory or establish his own domain, there is no reason for him to leave them behind. Instead, he will still be free to continue all the adventures he wants together with them. Back with Wendelin, we see several important figures arguing among themselves while negotiating over the dragon bones and the gem he obtained after defeating the undead dragon. At that moment, the cardinal suddenly appears and tells them that they should stop fighting over such matters because Wendelin is now in the public eye, meaning they need to act more reasonably. Because of that, the cardinal proposes paying Wendelin 115,000 gold coins for the dragon remains in the gem. The dragon bones and gem are extremely important because they are used to construct flying ships and make them capable of flight. At the end of the day, we see Wendelin leaving together with Arturio when suddenly a strange man begins acting ridiculous while showing off his spear skills. Arturio explains that because Wendelin received the dragon medal after 200 years, many guards now want to work under him as his personal officers. He also tells Wendelin that he should get used to people constantly asking him for jobs or even trying to marry their daughters to him. At that moment, Arturio reveals that Wendelin's popularity has become so huge that he can no longer casually walk around the city to shop freely. This was the reason Arturio warned him about it earlier. The following day, Wendelin arrives at the wedding together with his friends, where his brothers are already waiting. As expected, his brothers explain that their family did not bring a single gift for the ceremony, which could create problems because it would damage the family's reputation. Among nobles, it is extremely common for families to bring large and expensive gifts when attending weddings like this. Wendelin becomes cornered by the situation, so he offers to buy several gifts himself. A little later, the ceremony finally begins, and we see that Wendelin ended up purchasing a huge number of gifts. At the same time, he thinks to himself that being part of the nobility is an enormous headache. After the celebration ends, Arturio approaches Wendelin and hands him a small jar. Wendelin becomes completely shocked after realizing that Arturio somehow managed to obtain rice for him. Later that night, Wendelin uses his teleportation magic to return home together with all of his friends. Once there, they begin preparing a type of fermented miso. Wendelin explains that the process would normally take an entire year, so he uses his magic to complete it in only a few seconds. Several hours later, Wendelin visits his brother and prepares a stew using the ingredients they made. Everyone becomes extremely amazed by the flavor of the dish, including Wendelin himself. At the same time, in another scene, we see the cardinal speaking with Elise. He tells her that he may have finally found her future husband. The following day, Wendelin visits the cardinal and thanks him for inviting him to the ceremony. He also gives the cardinal a gift. The cardinal thanks him and asks him to sit down. Soon after, Wendelin becomes completely captivated after seeing Elise. She introduces herself to him as Elise O'Bain, the granddaughter of the cardinal himself. Wendelin also introduces himself and quickly notices that Elise possesses healing holy magic. Wendelin becomes surprised and explains that he can only use holy magic for purification. However, the cardinal replies that simply being capable of using holy magic at all is already something incredible. The cardinal then explains that Elise uses her holy magic to heal sick people within the church, which is why she is known as the Saint of the O'Bain family. Wendelin quietly thinks that Elise is very beautiful. Right after that, the cardinal tells him that many people have already proposed marriage to her. Jokingly, Wendelin says that he would probably be one of those people as well. To his surprise, the cardinal immediately replies that if he is truly interested, he is free to pursue her. However, Wendelin explains that he cannot get married yet because he is still underage, so for now, they could simply become engaged. The cardinal understands and explains that Elise is only 12 years old as well, meaning they will both need to wait until they become adults before they can officially marry. Wendelin then replies that he will reach adulthood in 3 years, so until then, he should simply enjoy the time he has left. He begins laughing about the situation, but the cardinal suddenly becomes serious and says that the agreement is now official. Wendelin becomes completely shocked because he genuinely thought they were only joking about the marriage discussion. He never expected them to actually negotiate an engagement with him. Several hours later, we see the cardinal speaking with his butler about Wendelin's situation. The cardinal explains that despite Wendelin's young age, he already understands matters related to the church, because he even donated part of his fortune to them. In the next scene, Wendelin tells his friends everything that happened with Elise and the cardinal. For some strange reason, he is also dressed like a clown. The others immediately congratulate him because he attended the ceremony and somehow ended up engaged to the cardinal's granddaughter. However, Wendelin still feels nervous because he barely knows Elise, and the two of them only exchanged a few words. Wendelin explains that in order to be with someone, he believes there should be real love involved. However, the others tell him that such feelings are not really necessary because in their world, people can become engaged after meeting only once. Soon after, Eric appears and explains that he and his wife, as well as Kurt and Amalie, all met for the first time on the very same day they became engaged. Because of that, it is apparently normal in this world for people to become engaged after only a single conversation. A little later, Wendelin and Erwin visit a pastry shop together. Here, we discover that the reason they painted Wendelin's face and dressed him like a clown was so he could walk around the city without being recognized. Soon after, Erwin suggests that Wendelin should buy Elise a gift. A little later, the two continue walking through the city when Wendelin suddenly notices the same man who constantly harasses him and begs to be hired as his subordinate. Erwin tells him not to worry because the man will never recognize him in that disguise. However, as soon as the man gets closer, he immediately tells Wendelin that he knows it is him because for some strange reason he recognizes his teeth. This instantly causes everyone nearby to realize that the disguised person is actually Wendelin. Because of that, Wendelin quickly uses his teleportation magic to escape together with Erwin. Back at the mansion, Eric advises Wendelin to hire someone so other people will stop constantly bothering him. Erwin jokingly offers to become Wendelin's servant, and without even thinking about it, Wendelin immediately accepts the idea. A little later, Wendelin teleports himself to the Cardinal's mansion, but because he miscalculates the spell, he ends up crashing onto the ground. The loud noise causes the Cardinal to look out the window because he thinks he heard something outside. Soon after, Elise appears and asks Wendelin what he is doing at her house. Wendelin replies that he needs to speak with her, but because he does not want anyone to see them, he carries her up to the roof of the mansion. Once they arrive there, Elise tells him that they should probably go back down and properly prepare themselves before talking. However, Wendelin pulls out the gift he brought for her, only to realize that it was crushed during the teleportation. Embarrassed, he explains that he simply wanted to talk with her alone. After talking for a while, Wendelin finally asks Elise how she truly feels about their engagement. Elise replies that she is perfectly fine with it because her grandfather personally chose her future husband. She also explains that everyone in the capital already knows about Wendelin, so he cannot really be considered a stranger anymore. In the next scene, we see Erwin proudly showing off to the girls because he now works under Wendelin. This quickly makes the girls jealous, and Erwin immediately starts treating them like his subordinates. The girls become annoyed and think that if he keeps acting like this, they will eventually beat him up. Soon after, Louise comes up with an idea and tells Ina that the only way to avoid being bullied by Erwin's new authority is to marry Wendelin themselves. However, since Wendelin is already engaged, Ina would have to become his second wife instead. At that exact moment, Wendelin suddenly appears and sits down on the sofa. Taking advantage of the opportunity, Ina begins dressing in more revealing clothes and even starts dancing in front of him in an attempt to flirt. Unfortunately, Wendelin has absolutely no idea what is happening, so he simply leaves the room. A little later, we see Louise continuing to prepare even more outfits to help flirt with Wendelin. She even designs a very revealing bikini for Ina. While the girls are arguing, the Cardinal's head butler arrives and delivers a letter to Wendelin because he and Elise are supposed to have dinner together. The following day, we see Wendelin and Elise having dinner together. However, just as Wendelin finishes eating, he immediately says that he should leave. The butler quickly stops him and explains that since this is technically their first date, Wendelin should get used to giving gifts. Soon after, we are taken to a jewelry shop because Wendelin wants to buy Elise an engagement ring. He becomes shocked after hearing how expensive the rings are. Elise tells him that there is no need to buy something so costly. However, Wendelin suddenly notices one particular ring that catches his attention because it contains a magical crystal. He becomes completely shocked after hearing that the ring costs 300 gold coins, which would basically be worth millions of dollars in the real world. Even so, after realizing how much Elise liked it, Wendelin decides to buy the ring anyway. In the next scene, the two are riding back home together in a carriage. During the trip, Wendelin mentions that the ring could actually be very useful for him because it has the ability to store enormous amounts of mana. However, Wendelin explains that he bought the ring because he noticed that Elise liked it. This leaves Elise completely surprised because he specifically purchased it just for her. Soon after, Wendelin tells her that the shopkeeper explained how the ring would begin glowing if mana was poured into it. Right after that, Wendelin channels a little of his mana into the ring, causing it to release a beautiful red light that instantly creates an incredibly romantic atmosphere around them. A little later, the Cardinal asks the butler about Wendelin, and the butler explains that Wendelin treats Elise like a normal girl. He also adds that the previous men who tried to become engaged to her only saw her as the Saint of Holheim. Several days later, we see Erwin together with the girls, and they ask him if he still plans to make them Wendelin's concubines. The girls reply that they still intend to do so, but they will wait until after the vacation, because Elise is currently still in the capital. At that exact moment, Elise suddenly enters the room, completely shocking everyone. Soon after, she asks the girls if she can speak with them because she wants to learn more about Wendelin. In the next scene, we return to Wendelin, who is currently speaking with the king. The king tells him that he has another mission waiting for him, which is to defeat another dragon. Since only powerful mages can withstand a dragon's breath, Wendelin immediately assumes that he will be going together with Brantag. However, the king explains that someone else will accompany him instead. Soon after, a man named Armstrong enters the room. He is introduced as the leader of the royal court mages. Armstrong kneels before the king and confidently promises that they will defeat the dragon immediately. Right after that, Wendelin and Armstrong leave together and fly toward the plains in search of the dragon. Several days later, we see Eric talking with the others about Wendelin. He explains that a temporary army has been formed under Wendelin's name because there is currently a dispute involving some territories, and since Wendelin does not own land of his own, his forces may eventually be needed. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when they hear noise outside. Soon after, they see numerous soldiers arriving, revealing themselves to be Wendelin's temporary army. Eric then explains that because Wendelin is currently absent, his personal followers will be responsible for leading the troops. This immediately shocks Erwin because he never expected to suddenly become a commander. Eric tells him not to worry because he will help him, while the girls also encourage him with supportive words. A little later, Erwin begins leading the army. While marching toward a camp, he explains that many of the soldiers are younger sons of noble families, while others are ordinary retainers and commoners. That same night, the army stops to rest, and Erwin begins talking with the girls. He admits that this could technically be considered his very first real battle. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when Louise enters the tent and informs them that priests with healing powers have arrived at the camp. At the same time, Elise asks about Wendelin, but the others explain that he already left and headed toward the dragon's nest. Back with Wendelin, we see that he has finally arrived at the dragon's nest. Armstrong loudly declares that it is time to begin the battle, and immediately afterward a massive dragon emerges from the nest. At that moment, Armstrong casts a spell that covers his body with an incredibly durable suit of armor, while also summoning a gigantic warhammer. Without hesitation, Armstrong charges straight toward the dragon and repeatedly attacks it. While watching the fight, Brantag explains that Armstrong's armor is even stronger than a magical barrier. However, it consumes an enormous amount of mana, so he tells Wendelin to prepare himself for the finishing blow. Soon after, Armstrong gives Wendelin the signal, and Wendelin immediately fires his purification spell directly at the dragon. At the same time, in another scene, Elise and the others are eating breakfast together. While they are talking, one of the knights suddenly arrives and informs them that Wendelin has successfully defeated the dragon. Hearing this instantly fills everyone with happiness. Back with Wendelin, he uses his magical bags to store the dragon's body. Brantag then tells him that he learns things incredibly fast. Since the mission itself did not offer any official reward, Brantag recommends selling the dragon parts instead. Both Brantag and Armstrong also warn Wendelin that the truly difficult battles are still ahead of him, because he will eventually have to fight enormous numbers of monsters. Wendelin then asks how large groups of weak monsters can be considered more dangerous than a dragon. In response, Brantag reminds him of what actually killed Alfred. Wendelin immediately remembers that Alfred did not die because of one powerful creature, but because he was overwhelmed by an endless number of monsters. Back with Elise, we see that she is currently healing wounded soldiers arriving from the battlefield. Because there are so many monsters involved in the war, countless soldiers continue arriving with serious injuries. Using her healing powers, Elise begins treating every knight brought before her. A little later, while trying to heal a severely injured soldier, she realizes that she has completely run out of mana. However, she suddenly remembers the magical ring that Wendelin gave her. Sometime later, one of the knights tells Elise that thanks to Wendelin, many people are still alive. He also explains that Wendelin is an incredibly brave knight, because from the very beginning he fought at the front lines of the battle. After hearing this, Elise remembers what Wendelin told her earlier while they were riding together in the carriage. He said that he felt he needed to act like a hero, even though many times he did not truly have enough courage. Remembering those words motivates Elise, and she continues helping every wounded soldier she can. By the time dawn arrives, another knight appears and announces that they have won the battle. However, instead of celebrating, another soldier sadly informs everyone that Wendelin was seriously injured during the fight. Hearing this immediately throws Elise into panic, and she runs out in search of him. But just as she exits the fortress, Wendelin suddenly calls out to her. The moment Elise turns around and sees him alive, she instantly collapses from relief. A little later, Elise wakes up beside Wendelin underneath a tree. Wendelin tells her that he is proud of her because he heard all the knights thanking her for saving their lives. Feeling a little sad, Elise quietly admits that she knows she is not really a hero. After hearing her repeat those words several times, Wendelin finally understands what she truly means. Right after that, Armstrong suddenly comes running toward them while calling Elise his niece. These words completely shock Wendelin because he had no idea that Elise was actually related to Armstrong. The following day, the group is gathered inside Wendelin's mansion because the Duke ordered them to remain in the capital a little longer. Because of that, everyone is busy cleaning and remodeling the mansion. At that moment, Elise arrives at the house, causing the girls to immediately realize that their plan to seduce Wendelin will now become much more difficult since they obviously cannot flirt with him in front of his future wife. Soon after, Elise tells Wendelin that she originally thought the girls were already his fiancés because they were all living together with him. Wendelin casually replies that they are only his concubines, but the girls instantly seize the opportunity and loudly demand to become officially engaged to him as well. Wendelin becomes completely confused by the sudden proposal, but in the end, he agrees to it because Elise surprisingly has no problem with the idea at all. Wendelin truly got lucky because his future wife turned out to be far less jealous than expected, and even allowed the girls to join him as well. Sometime later, we see Wendelin attending another wedding together with his brothers because it seems that Helmut has finally gotten married. Even though Helmut married into a knight family, the others believe it was probably only possible because he is related to Wendelin. Soon after, Paul tells Wendelin that because everyone's attention is currently focused on him, he should not embarrass himself during the martial arts tournament. Wendelin becomes confused because he has no idea what tournament they are talking about. Eric then explains that a martial arts tournament is held every 3 years, and it is tradition for at least one noble to participate. Because of that, Wendelin will now have to join the competition himself. Unfortunately for Wendelin, there is no magic division in the tournament. The only categories are swords, spears, bows, and bare-handed combat. Wendelin does not really understand what they mean by bare-handed combat, but it is most likely just fist fighting. Paul explains that nobles normally enter the sword division, meaning Wendelin will have to fight using a sword as well. Trying to be clever, Wendelin suggests that he could simply strengthen his body with magic. However, Eric immediately stops him and explains that using magic during the tournament is strictly forbidden. Hearing this instantly makes Wendelin extremely nervous. Several hours later, the group meets together with Brantag. He tells them that they will all participate in the tournament because their families do not want to be embarrassed. Soon after, the girls stand up and announce that they are going to begin training without relying on magic. Meanwhile, Erwin stays behind and speaks with Brantag. He says that he will remain there because he personally has nothing to lose. However, Brantag quickly reminds him that he will soon turn 15 years old, which means he will officially become an adult. If he causes trouble after that, he could easily be expelled from the Adventurer Guild. Brantag also warns Erwin that he should stop depending too much on the girls, because he never knows when he could eventually be replaced. That same night, the group is eating dinner together when Wendelin explains that he already spoke with the Cardinal because he wants Elise to officially join their adventurer group. The girls have no objections to this at all, and they immediately ask Wendelin whether he plans to participate in the tournament. Wendelin replies that he will definitely join before asking Erwin if he has any problem with Elise becoming part of the group. Erwin says that he has absolutely no problem with it, and hearing this instantly makes Wendelin extremely happy. However, Erwin suddenly slams his hand on the table and loudly declares that he is going to win the tournament. During the following days, the group continues training together, and Erwin quickly stands out among them because he is overflowing with motivation. He constantly repeats that he is not just planning to participate in the tournament, but that he is absolutely going to win it. Several days later, while the group is eating dinner again, Wendelin mentions that the current champion of the tournament will also be participating. He explains that there were rumors claiming the champion planned to retire this year and begin training younger fighters. But after receiving a direct request from the king, he agreed to participate one final time. After hearing this, Erwin becomes a little discouraged and immediately heads to his room. Ina and Louise follow him to check if he is all right, and they ask whether he plans to skip training for the night. Erwin sadly replies that if someone as strong as the former champion is participating, then he basically has no chance of winning at all. The following day, Erwin goes to speak with Wendelin, who is relaxing on the sofa. From behind him, Erwin quietly asks if he will be removed from the group if he fails to win the tournament. However, he quickly realizes that Wendelin is completely asleep. Erwin wakes him up, and Wendelin immediately explains that he has been worried about Elise because she has not been physically training. He fears that she might eventually become a burden to the group, which is why he discovered that she has secretly been training on her own. Hearing those words completely changes Erwin's thoughts. Instead of asking whether he would be expelled from the group for losing, he once again declares that he will definitely win the tournament. Right after that, Erwin goes to find the girls and apologizes to them because he realizes he has been thinking only about himself this entire time. Soon after, the girls jokingly tell him that they will beat him in a race, causing everyone to immediately start running together. Several days later, the long-awaited day of the tournament finally arrives. Armstrong speaks with Brantag and says that he at least hopes the group can make it to the preliminary rounds. Soon after, Elise arrives carrying food for everyone. Armstrong then tells the group that even if they lose, they can return without any shame because nothing bad will happen to them. A little later, the first battle of the tournament finally begins, and we are introduced to Warren, the champion of the previous tournament. This instantly makes Wendelin extremely nervous because Warren ends up becoming his very first opponent. Wendelin draws his sword, but with only a single movement, Warren strikes him using the handle of his blade and defeats Wendelin almost instantly. In the next scene, we see Wendelin speaking with Armstrong and Brantag. The two jokingly tell him that he returned far too quickly and hope the others will not lose as badly as he did. Soon after, we see the rest of the group fighting in their own matches and actually winning several battles. However, after some time passes, Louise eventually returns because she lost during her semifinal match. Brantag congratulates her and explains that she still performed extremely well despite most of her strength depending heavily on magic. Back at the arena, Ina prepares to face the guard who has constantly been bothering Wendelin and begging to become his subordinate. Ina becomes extremely nervous because she already knows how strong the man's defense is. If she wins this fight, she will advance to the preliminary rounds. The guard immediately launches a rapid barrage of attacks, which Ina barely manages to block. However, just as she tries to counterattack, she is instantly defeated by one of the guard's movements. Ina returns to the group feeling completely disappointed in herself. At the same time, we see that Wendelin has already fallen asleep once again. Elise then explains that the food she brought was personally prepared by Wendelin himself, which is why he barely managed to sleep the night before. Back at the tournament, we see Erwin winning his semi-final match, which means he will now advance to the finals and face Warren. Warren approaches him and says that he is looking forward to their battle. A little later, we see Louise treating Erwin's injuries. Erwin admits that he is extremely worried because he does not want Wendelin to remove him from the group, which is why he feels he absolutely must win. The girls then ask him if he at least looked at the food Elise brought earlier because Wendelin prepared something special for him. The moment Erwin opens it, he becomes shocked after realizing that Wendelin personally made him a meal wishing him good luck. Erwin takes a bite of the food and immediately stands up, filled with motivation. He then tells the girls to save the rest for later because he now has a battle he fully intends to win. Soon after, Erwin heads toward the battlefield. In another scene, we see Wendelin's father working together with Kurt. Suddenly, Amalie arrives and tells Kurt that someone is looking for him because they wish to discuss something important regarding Wendelin. This slightly annoys Kurt, but when he returns home, a man hands him a letter and explains that it comes from an auditor connected to the capital's finance office. Kurt immediately assumes that the person simply wants to become associated with Wendelin's family. However, the moment Amalie opens the letter, she becomes completely shocked after reading that Wendelin supposedly died while exploring ancient ruins. Back with Wendelin, he explains that 3 years have already passed and that he is now officially an adult, meaning he can finally become a true adventurer. Soon after, we see the group talking together while explaining that they have already officially registered as adventurers. Ina also mentions that they plan to begin hunting monsters in nearby areas. Wendelin becomes extremely happy because he now has much more freedom than before. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted when Brantag appears and explains that he has a request from the king involving the exploration of ancient ruins. A little later, the group arrives at the ruins together with Brantag. As they enter, Brantag explains that the ruins are extremely dangerous and were only discovered 3 years ago, shortly before Wendelin defeated the dragon. He also reveals that soldiers were previously sent into the ruins but never returned. Because of that, more people were later sent in to investigate what happened, but they disappeared as well. Hearing this immediately makes the group nervous. As they continue deeper into the ruins, Brantag discusses the situation with everyone, and they eventually conclude that a dragon may actually be hidden somewhere inside. That is the main reason why Wendelin and his group were called there to exterminate the monster. Soon after, they discover a massive door, and without hesitation, Brantag immediately opens it. Inside, they find a strange magical circle, but there does not seem to be anyone around. However, moments later, Brantag suddenly warns everyone to get out immediately, but before they can escape, the door slams shut. A magical spell then begins appearing beneath their feet, trapping them all inside. Brantag quickly realizes that it is a trap created by an ancient magical civilization. He warns everyone to prepare for battle because even he has no idea what is about to happen. Suddenly, the group begins getting teleported one by one. Soon after, we see them all waking up while worrying about what just happened. Brantag explains that they were teleported to the deepest level of the ruins and that the only way to survive is to climb all the way back up. Louise then suggests that Wendelin should simply use teleportation magic to escape. However, Wendelin explains that teleportation only works if he is extremely familiar with the destination, and since he has no idea where they currently are, using the spell is impossible. Because of that, the group has no choice but to move forward without knowing what dangers await them. After some time, they arrive in a chamber filled with dozens of battle statues. Moments later, the door suddenly closes behind them, and the statues begin activating one by one, forcing the entire group into battle positions. However, the others tell Wendelin to stay in the back because he needs to conserve as much power as possible. At that moment, the group begins attacking the statues while Wendelin, Brantag, and Elise support them from the rear. After a long battle, they finally manage to completely destroy all of the statues. Soon after, the group notices several corpses lying around the room, and concludes that they belong to the soldiers who were sent into the ruins years ago. A little later, Louise suddenly hears a strange noise. When she looks toward the staircase, she realizes that even more statue monsters are approaching them. In another scene, we see the king and Armstrong becoming extremely worried because 5 days have already passed and there is still no sign of Wendelin's group. Because of that, they begin believing that the group has officially died inside the ruins. Soon after, rumors about Wendelin and the others begin spreading throughout the castle. Several men even approach the cardinal and express their condolences regarding what supposedly happened to Wendelin and his granddaughter. However, the cardinal confidently replies that he knows they will return alive. While walking through the castle, the cardinal eventually encounters the finance officer known as Lugner. In another scene, we see Lugner's younger brother meeting with another man. The man tells him that he will soon become the true head of finance, before handing him a letter. He then orders him to visit Kurt, Wendelin's eldest brother, and convince him to officially name his own children as the heirs of the Baumeister family. Back inside the ruins, the group looks more exhausted with each passing day, because they have been fighting non-stop for several days. Without rest, they have even started taking turns sleeping while the others stand guard. Soon after, the group continues climbing through the ruins. Even after ascending several more floors, everyone remains worried because they still have no idea how far they are from the surface. At one point, Elise is healing Erwin's injuries when he sadly admits that if things continue like this, they will all eventually die because they have been fighting continuously for too many days and are slowly beginning to lose hope. Several hours later, the group climbs another staircase and arrives in front of a strange door. At first, they become excited because there do not appear to be any monsters nearby. However, in the distance, they suddenly notice something strange. Moments later, a giant golem dragon awakens. The creature immediately fires a powerful breath attack at them, but Brantag and Wendelin quickly block it using a magical barrier. At the same time, even more monsters begin appearing around them, and one of them manages to attack Ina. Elise immediately rushes over to heal her. Brantag and Wendelin quickly realize that if the battle continues like this, the dragon will eventually kill all of them. Because of that, Wendelin suggests focusing entirely on attacking the dragon instead of only defending themselves. Brantag agrees with the plan and stands behind Wendelin before transferring his magical power into him, greatly increasing Wendelin's strength. While doing this, Brantag comments that Wendelin reminds him very much of Alfred. Wendelin immediately begins charging an attack against the dragon, but because the creature is still too powerful, their magical barrier slowly starts getting pushed back. The others desperately encourage Wendelin not to give up, leaving him with no choice but to use a secret ability he has been hiding. Suddenly, Wendelin approaches Elise and uses a spell called Miracle Light before kissing her. A massive flash of light immediately erupts, causing Elise to collapse unconscious. At that exact moment, Wendelin gains an enormous amount of power and unleashes a gigantic beam that completely destroys the dragon. As soon as the dragon is defeated, all of the remaining monsters instantly stop moving as well. Right after the battle ends, Wendelin also collapses unconscious beside Elise. Several hours later, we see Wendelin and Elise lying together in a bed. Louise then asks Ina what exactly the Miracle Light spell is. Ina explains that the spell increases a person's endurance and basically grants them additional magical power. Ina also explains that a kiss is not actually necessary to activate the Miracle Light spell. Because of that, the girls quickly realize that Elise simply took advantage of the situation to kiss Wendelin. Their conversation is suddenly interrupted by Erwin, calls them over to see something important. Shortly after, Wendelin finally wakes up, and soon after that he arrives together with Elise to meet Brantag. Brantag explains that the ancient ruins were originally created by an old count named Klaus von Exelberg, a mage from the ancient magical civilization. He discovered this because the ruins contain massive libraries filled with books describing the place in detail. According to the records, Exelberg created the ruins to test warriors and determine whether they were worthy of inheriting his incredible legacy. Soon after, the group is interrupted by the girls, who excitedly tell Wendelin that he needs to see what lies on the other side of the chamber. When they arrive, they discover numerous ancient ships that once served as cores for magical vessels. At the same time, Erwin presses a button, causing a large gate leading outside to open. Because of that, the group finally realizes that they successfully escaped from the ruins. Sometime later, Wendelin's group kneels before the king, while Lugner carefully reads through all the information and treasures they brought back from the ruins. Lugner becomes completely shocked after calculating the reward they are about to receive. The reward ends up being an unbelievable 2 million gold coins, which will be paid to them gradually over the course of 20 years. Wendelin becomes extremely overwhelmed because he can barely comprehend the amount of money he is about to receive. A little later, Armstrong speaks with the group and becomes surprised after hearing that they plan to leave the capital. After thinking carefully about it, Wendelin decided that he would rather continue working as an adventurer in Breitberg instead. Armstrong accepts Wendelin's decision and promises that before he leaves, he will personally investigate the person responsible for spreading the rumors about Wendelin's death. Wendelin becomes completely confused because he never even knew those rumors existed outside the ruins. He even mentions that many people became terrified after suddenly seeing him return alive. At that moment, Armstrong explains that there is most likely someone out there who deeply hates Wendelin. The others then comment that people probably hate them as well, simply because they are Wendelin's companions. Soon after, Ina points out that the Adventurer's Guide includes a rule allowing adventurers to refuse part of a reward if they feel uncomfortable accepting such a large amount. Because of that, the girls and Erwin decide together that they will not take too much of the reward money. Erwin explains that Wendelin already pays them extremely well. Elise then says that her share should also belong to Wendelin. Hearing this, the others congratulate him because 10 million coins will now belong entirely to him alone. Instead of feeling happy, Wendelin becomes extremely nervous because he realizes that if people already hated him before, they will hate him even more after learning how wealthy he has become. In another scene, we see Baron Lugner meeting secretly with several individuals. Even though their original plan failed because Wendelin survived, Lugner proudly explains that he successfully gathered together many people who despise Wendelin. Because of that, everyone present at the meeting now wants Wendelin dead. In another scene, we see a hooded girl arriving near Wendelin's mansion. While the group is drinking tea and eating cookies inside the house, Wendelin suddenly senses the girl's presence. Wendelin then mentions that once they leave for Breitberg, they should probably leave someone behind to watch over the mansion. The others agree, explaining that someone who hates Wendelin might eventually come and destroy the place. After thinking about who could take care of the mansion, the group decides that the winner of the Spear Division tournament would be the perfect person for the job. They are clearly referring to the same guard who constantly begged Wendelin to hire him. A little later, the man finally arrives at the mansion, and we learn that his name is Roderick. He becomes extremely happy after hearing the offer and immediately accepts the position. Soon after, the group sits together to eat a cake they prepared to welcome Roderick. However, they suddenly notice the mysterious girl's presence outside the mansion once again. Everyone immediately goes on guard, but despite searching carefully, they fail to find her anywhere. In the next scene, we see the mysterious girl finally arriving in the city. After removing her hood, we discover that the girl is actually Wilma. Several hours later, Wendellin's group arrives at the city's massive magical laboratory. There, they are welcomed by a man named Luchner Benno, the director of the laboratory. He sincerely thanks Wendelin for bringing them the magical circle recovered from the ruins. Wendelin becomes very interested because he heard rumors about a magical circle capable of attracting anything the user desires or imagines. Luchner explains that the experiment is still in its testing phase and also requires a tremendous amount of magical power to activate. Elise then asks if Wendelin can try using it, and Luchner gives him permission to test the device. Wendelin steps onto the platform and begins imagining what he wants to summon. However, the moment he activates the spell, a pair of women's underwear suddenly appears in front of him. One of the girls instantly punches him while the others call him a complete pervert. Soon after, Erwin tells Wendelin to try again because he was obviously thinking about the wrong thing. Wendelin begins concentrating once more, while the girls nervously hold on to their underwear because they are afraid he might summon them again. Fortunately, this time Wendelin properly focuses on what he wants, and the experiment becomes a complete success. A little later, we see Wilma secretly spying on the group from behind the trees as they leave the laboratory. The group is carrying a large cart covered by a blanket, making it impossible to see what is inside. Soon after, Wendelin says that it is finally time to return home, and the group immediately leaves using his teleportation magic. At the same time, in another scene we see Roderick standing outside Baron Lugner's mansion. He begins suspecting that something suspicious is happening because two mysterious men are leaving Lugner's mansion inside a carriage. Several days later, we once again see Wilma secretly spying on Wendelin's group. This time they are attending a large party, and Wilma becomes surprised after noticing Duke Breithilde among the guests. However, Ina explains that because the group will soon be moving to Breitberg, the Duke personally invited them to the celebration. Soon after, Wendelin arrives carrying trays filled with tuna from the Northern Sea. He also explains that he spent 3 entire years preparing soy sauce. At first, the guests seem hesitant about trying raw fish together with the strange sauce. However, the moment they taste it, they become completely amazed by the flavor. A little later, while everyone continues enjoying the meal, we suddenly see Wilma crying while looking desperate and emotional. Up until this point, we still do not know the true reason behind Wilma's strange behavior or why she has been secretly following the group this entire time. Soon after, we see Roderick speaking privately with Wendelin. He confesses that the person responsible for spreading the rumors about Wendelin's death was Baron Rugner, the younger brother of the finance officer Lugner. Roderick also explains that Rugner planned to use Wendelin in order to remove his older brother from power and take control of the finance position himself. Roderick further reveals that Rugner was the one who sent the letter to Wendelin's family, the same letter Amalie previously read. His goal was to convince Kurt to name his 2 sons as the future heirs of the Baumeister family so he could manipulate them later on. Roderick then explains that Rugner will probably stop bothering Wendelin for a while because he already dealt with him personally. Soon after, we see Baron Rugner together with another man. The man tells him that rumors are now spreading about Rugner himself, specifically that he conspired against Wendelin in order to guarantee his death. At that exact moment, a woman enters the room and informs Rugner that a messenger has arrived because the king wishes to see him immediately. Hearing this leaves Rugner feeling completely powerless. Back with Wendelin, Roderick explains that he decided to fight fire with fire, which is why he intentionally spread those rumors in order to cause problems for Rugner. Shortly afterward, Roderick confesses that he already suspected from the beginning that Rugner was the true culprit. He then reveals something even more shocking by admitting that Rugner is actually his father. However, Rugner never recognized him as a legitimate son. Their conversation is interrupted when Elise arrives and offers Roderick some salmon. At that moment, the mysterious girl spying on them can no longer hold herself back and suddenly rushes toward the door. The guests become terrified after hearing someone violently banging outside. Moments later, the girl completely rips both doors off the mansion with overwhelming strength, like an unstoppable monster. She immediately begins walking toward Wendelin, and Erwin tries to stop her. However, she effortlessly throws him to the ground using a martial arts move. Yet just before reaching Wendelin, she suddenly stops and starts eating the salmon instead. At that moment, we are introduced to Marshal Edgar. He apologizes to Wendelin and explains that the girl is actually his daughter. He also says that he had been waiting for the perfect opportunity to introduce her properly. The girl then explains that she had secretly been spying on Wendelin because she wanted to confirm whether he properly fed the people around him. After observing him, she concluded that he did an excellent job. Soon after, she asks Elise for even more salmon before immediately telling her to follow along. Edgar apologizes once again and explains that for his daughter, food is the most important thing in the world. Their conversation is interrupted when Brandtag suddenly arrives and explains that the girl suffers from something known as hero syndrome. He tells everyone that her muscles naturally absorb magical power, greatly enhancing all of her physical abilities. Edgar then adds that the downside is that her body constantly consumes magical power, which forces her to eat enormous amounts of food in order to recover energy. Laughing a little, Edgar tells Wendelin that supporting her financially should not be a problem for someone as wealthy as him. Wendelin responds with a completely disgusted expression. Meanwhile, the girls become very fond of Wilma and happily promise to give her plenty of food. Soon after, Edgar asks Wendelin if he would consider hiring Wilma as his personal guard. He even jokingly suggests that Wendelin could marry her if he wanted to. Their discussion is interrupted when the Duke suddenly arrives and tells Wendelin that he has another favor to ask of him. In the next scene, we return to the moment when Amalie received the false letter reporting Wendelin's death. After hearing the news, Kurt begins laughing in a very suspicious way. However, he suddenly hears noise outside. When Kurt looks through the window, he is shocked to discover Wendelin and his entire group standing outside waiting for him. A little later, the group enters the house and begins discussing the Duke's request. Many years ago, the Duke ordered soldiers from the Baumeister family to enter the Forest of Evil, but many of them eventually turned into undead zombies. Because of that, the Duke now wants Wendelin to purify their bodies and finally allow them to rest in peace. Kurt becomes angry because that would mean the Duke clearly wants the bodies of the fallen soldiers, so the discussion quickly turns into negotiating how much compensation should be paid. Herman then asks about the belongings of those soldiers, and Wendelin replies that they will try to recover everything they can find. Soon after, Wendelin calmly says that they should officially begin the negotiations. Hearing this immediately enrages Kurt, who shouts that if they are going to talk, then it will not be anything official. The others instantly defend Wendelin and remind Kurt that even if Wendelin is his younger brother, he still must show proper respect, because Wendelin is now a noble baron. This quickly causes tension to rise between both sides, and a small conflict almost breaks out. However, the argument is suddenly interrupted when Wilma's stomach loudly growls because she is extremely hungry. A little later, we see Kurt holding a meeting with the villagers. The people begin discussing the rumors that Wendelin has returned to the village. They also ask whether it is true that he came back in order to purify the bodies of the soldiers who died during that old battle. One of the villagers then explains that once Wendelin completes the mission, his group plans to leave the area immediately afterward. In another scene, we see Wendelin's group eating dinner together with Herman. Wendelin asks why Kurt seems to hate him so much. Herman sadly explains that Kurt is afraid Wendelin might steal the family inheritance from him. Soon after, we are introduced to Marlene Baumeister, Wendelin's older sister. She reveals that their grandfather also became one of the undead zombies. Wendelin promises her that he will recover their grandfather's belongings as well. Hearing this makes Marlene extremely happy, and she openly declares that Wendelin should really be the true heir to the territory instead of Kurt. Herman quickly tries to silence her because he knows that if Kurt overhears those words, another conflict will begin immediately. However, Wendelin calmly says that it would be best to finish the mission quickly and leave the village as soon as possible. The following morning, the group heads deep into the forest. In order to attract the undead zombies, they begin loudly insulting and provoking them. After a short while, zombies start appearing from every direction. At that moment, Elise casts a spell to help expand Wendelin's purification barrier. Because of that, every zombie that passes through the barrier is instantly purified. After spending several minutes purifying the undead, the group realizes that their grandfather is still missing. Suddenly, a giant dragon appears and immediately tries to attack them. At that exact moment, Wilma charges straight at the monster and cuts off its head with a single swing of her axe. While the dragon is immobilized, Elise begins purifying it, although it takes much longer compared to purifying the normal zombies. While Elise continues purifying the dragon, even more monsters begin approaching the group. However, the creatures are nowhere near strong enough to challenge them, and the group defeats them with ease. Soon after, the purification barrier suddenly disappears, and at that exact moment, their grandfather finally appears. He had transformed into a lich, a special type of undead that still possesses intelligence and the ability to speak. The lich immediately asks about Marlene, and Wendelin replies that she is doing very well and that her husband takes good care of her. Hearing this finally allows the undead grandfather to relax. He slowly drops the sword he was holding and quietly prepares himself for purification. Shortly afterward, Elise successfully purifies his body. Sometime later, Wendelin returns all of the recovered armor and weapons to the villagers, so they can finally honor and mourn their dead relatives properly. However, they are suddenly interrupted by Kurt, who insists that all of the armor and weapons should be taken to the blacksmith because the territory lacks iron, meaning the items should be melted down and reused. This greatly upsets the villagers because those objects are the last remaining memories of their loved one. Wendelin immediately steps in and asks Kurt not to take away the villagers' belongings because they are the only things the people still have left of their families. Kurt argues that they desperately need iron. In response, Wendelin casually pulls out a gigantic cube of iron and tells Kurt that now there is no reason to confiscate the villagers' keepsakes anymore. This instantly makes Kurt furious, causing him to storm away from the scene while the villagers once again thank Wendelin for helping them. In the next scene, Wendelin and his group return to the Duke. The Duke explains that the recovered armor and weapons will be sorted according to the families they belonged to. The Duke then asks Wendelin to remain in the Baumeister territory for a little longer because he plans to send a letter to Lord Baumeister allowing Wendelin and his companions to freely hunt inside the Forest of Evil and nearby areas. Wendelin does not like this idea very much because he already knows that Kurt hates him and does not want him nearby. A little later, while the group is leaving, we see the Duke secretly talking with Lugner. Lugner comments that almost everything is proceeding exactly according to plan, and the Duke calmly agrees. Soon after, the group teleports back to Wendelin's old home and speaks with some longtime friends of the family. They explain that Wendelin was ordered to remain there for a little longer, so they suggest attending the funeral ceremony the following day. The next morning, the villagers gather together to honor those who died during the war long ago. We also see Elise praying during the funeral because the current priest is already too old to properly perform the ceremony himself. One of the elderly villagers cannot believe that Kurt chose not to attend the funeral at all. Later that night, the village holds a large banquet. While everyone is enjoying the celebration, Wendelin goes to visit Amalie and her children. They are praying at an altar the villagers prepared for the dead soldiers. Wendelin approaches them and apologizes for not visiting sooner. Amalie understands and explains that she knows he has been extremely busy because of his work. Several hours later, after Amalie leaves, an old family friend approaches Wendelin and asks him to take control of the Baumeister territory. The man explains that with Kurt leading the domain, the village will never truly prosper. Wendelin immediately refuses because he does not want to create conflict within his own family. However, the man reveals that the king himself actually wants Wendelin to become the ruler of the Baumeister domain. At that moment, Brantag suddenly appears and confirms that the man is telling the truth. He explains that the king most likely wants Wendelin to officially take control of the Baumeister territory. In another scene, we see the most powerful people in the kingdom gathering together for a meeting. At the same time, Brantag explains the truth behind the king's long-term plan involving Wendelin and Kurt. According to Brantag, Kurt has controlled part of the territory for years despite being a terrible person. He also reveals that the reason Wendelin was sent back home was specifically to provoke Kurt and expose his true nature. Duke Bleenroder took advantage of the undead zombie situation to send Wendelin back to his old home on purpose. The plan was to provoke Kurt into eventually trying to kill Wendelin, which would finally give the kingdom a valid reason to stop him. At the same time, Wendelin's return was also meant to improve the villagers' opinion of him as a possible heir. Brantag then explains that Wendelin would actually be perfect for ruling the territory because, with all the resources and wealth he possesses, he could greatly develop the land and improve the lives of the people living there. Brantag further reveals that this is the real reason why the kingdom allowed Wendelin to earn such massive amounts of money from all of his missions. In other words, Almost everything had been planned from the very beginning. Even so, Brantag admits that these are technically only his personal theories, although he strongly believes this is exactly what happened. The following morning, Wendelin looks extremely thoughtful while sitting with his friends. The others ask if he is all right, but at that moment, Herman enters and tells him that someone is looking for him outside. When Wendelin steps outside, he begins playing together with Amelie's children. The others soon follow him outside as well. At that moment, Erwin asks what would happen to the children if Wendelin officially became the heir of the territory. Ina sadly explains that if that happened, the children would immediately lose their noble status and would most likely be forced to leave the house entirely. That same night, while the group is eating dinner, everyone looks very troubled and deep in thought. Suddenly, they hear loud shouting outside the house. Wendelin immediately teleports there together with Herman and Brantag. Upon arriving, they discover several village leaders confronting Wendelin's father. The villagers demand that Wendelin be named the new heir of the territory because they are completely tired of the way Kurt has been treating them. They openly declare that they are no longer afraid of whatever punishment Kurt might try to inflict on them. The villagers then desperately beg Wendelin to become their ruler because they no longer want to continue living under Kurt's control. They also explain that they rushed there after hearing rumors that Wendelin planned to leave the following day. However, Wendelin reassures them that he does not intend to leave yet because he still needs more time to think carefully about everything. While everyone is talking, Brantag suddenly notices someone hiding inside the bushes nearby. He immediately walks over and discovers that the hidden person is actually Jürgen, one of Wendelin's family friends. Brantag calmly tells Jürgen that he already knows what he has been doing. However, since Jürgen's actions are not truly harmful, Brantag says he can continue, but he should remain careful because someone else may secretly be manipulating him. Soon after, the two walk away in opposite directions. Before leaving, Jürgen warns Brantag to be especially careful around Amalie. At the same time, we see Amalie secretly watching them through a window. Shortly afterward, she walks through the hallways and overhears a group of villagers arguing with Kurt about Wendelin and the others. The villagers ask Kurt when Wendelin plans to leave because it seems obvious that he is slowly winning the support of the people. Furious, Kurt loudly declares that anyone who opposes him will be severely punished. A little later, Wendelin gathers together with the others and begins wondering what would happen if he actually took control of the territory. He assumes that Kurt might simply be exiled from the land. However, Brantag immediately explains that the royal palace would never allow someone like Kurt to remain free. Wendelin asks what exactly that means, and Brantag coldly replies that in such a situation, Kurt would most likely be executed. The following day, Wendelin returns to Kurt's house, and the two finally have a private conversation. Wendelin offers to financially support him in exchange for receiving a portion of land for himself. He calmly explains that Kurt can keep their father's territory while simply pointing out the specific lands he personally wants. However, as expected, Kurt immediately grabs the map and tears it into pieces. Furious, Kurt screams at Wendelin and calls him a thief, accusing him of trying to steal all of his power. Soon after, he smashes the teacup he had been drinking from and orders Wendelin to leave immediately. Wendelin realizes there is no point continuing the argument, so he quietly leaves in order to avoid creating a bigger conflict. As he walks outside, he runs into Amalie. The two then step outside together and discuss everything that just happened. Wendelin explains the proposal he offered Kurt, saying that his plan would not have harmed anyone, yet he no longer knows how to peacefully resolve the situation. Amalie then tells him that she is willing to do absolutely anything necessary to protect her children and preserve their noble status. Shortly afterward, she says goodbye and leaves together with the children, while Wendelin also quietly departs from the area. Several hours later, we see Wendelin and the others mixing different ingredients together for cooking. During this moment, Wendelin finally announces to the group that he has decided to take control of the territory. Although he understands that his decision will inevitably hurt several people, he firmly declares that he will not allow anyone to die. He then asks the others to remain by his side no matter what happens. At that moment, Elise gently reassures him, saying that they will always stay with him no matter what decision he makes. A little later, Wendelin and the others begin selling their homemade products to the villagers after opening a small marketplace. Wendelin introduces one of the products as homemade mayonnaise, and after tasting it, the villagers become completely fascinated by the flavor. Meanwhile, the others begin selling clothes, tools, and many other useful items, making the villagers extremely happy with all of the products being offered. However, some of Kurt's allies notice everything that is happening and quickly rush off to inform him. Kurt becomes completely furious after hearing the news, while the men explain that Wendelin is stealing away all of their customers. One of the men suggests killing Wendelin, but Kurt immediately calls them idiots because Wendelin is an extremely powerful mage who could wipe them out within seconds. A little later, the men begin returning home, but Wendelin suddenly appears directly in front of them using teleportation magic. The men attempt to run away, only to discover that Wendelin's entire group has already surrounded them. The next morning, one of Kurt's allies rushes to him in a panic. He explains that the others have betrayed him. Kurt immediately assumes that Wendelin threatened them using magic. However, the man explains that Wendelin did the opposite. Instead of threatening them, he gave them enough money to start completely new lives in the capital. In another scene, we see Wendelin together with Roderick in the capital. Roderick reveals that their strategy is to peacefully destroy Kurt's influence by gradually taking away all of his allies one by one. Soon after, the two arrive at a house, and Wendelin explains that this alone should be enough to allow Amelie and her children to live peaceful lives. This also reveals that he intends to separate Amelie from Kurt in order to keep her safe and far away from him. A little later, the two stand in front of a church. Wendelin explains that once the situation becomes truly serious, Kurt will most likely hide there because attacking someone inside the church would not be easy. Even so, Wendelin admits that negotiating with the cardinal afterward will probably become extremely difficult. Roderick says that everything happening right now will be extremely difficult for Kurt. However, Wendelin calmly replies that at the very least, Kurt will still remain alive. A little later, while Wendelin walks through the capital, we see a hooded man quietly passing beside them. The mysterious figure then heads into an alleyway where Ragnar is secretly waiting. Ragnar hands the man a strange ocarina-like object. Soon after, the hooded man takes a horse and rides directly toward the mountains. In another scene, we return to Kurt, who becomes completely shocked after realizing that only one of his friends attended the village assembly. Estelle explains that everyone in the village is now supporting Wendelin. He also reveals that Wendelin personally offered him enough money to move to the capital and start a new life there. Estelle apologizes to Kurt because he already accepted Wendelin's offer before quickly running away from the area. After being abandoned once again, Kurt slowly falls into a completely unstable mental state. He then prepares a dagger, clearly intending to kill Wendelin himself. However, the moment Kurt steps outside his house, the mysterious man from the alley suddenly appears before him. The man tells Kurt that trying to kill Wendelin with a simple dagger would be completely useless. Instead, he presents the magical item Ragnar previously gave him and explains that it is an ancient magical artifact known as the Dragon Taming Flute. He guarantees that using it will allow Kurt to finally kill Wendelin. The mysterious man then hands over the flute and explains that Kurt does not need to pay anything for it right now. However, once Kurt becomes the absolute ruler of the territory, they will later negotiate regarding his own interests. Desperate, Kurt immediately accepts the offer. The following day, Brantag uses his tracking magic and informs the group that Kurt is extremely close to their location. The others begin discussing the suspicious man who met with Kurt, because Brantag's tracking magic allowed them to follow his movement. Louise comments that she expected Kurt to hire an assassin or something similar. Soon after, Wendelin approaches Kurt, who is standing completely alone. Wendelin pretends to act casual and asks what Kurt is doing there. However, Kurt immediately replies that he already knows Wendelin's friends are hiding nearby, forcing them to come out into the open. Kurt then begins angrily complaining about all the good things Wendelin has done for the villagers. At that moment, everyone immediately becomes alert. Kurt suddenly threatens them by saying that if anyone makes a move, he will play the flute. Brantag instantly recognizes the artifact and explains that although he has never personally seen one before, the object is an ancient magical item recovered from old ruins. He further explains that whoever plays the flute gains the ability to summon dragons. The others confidently point out that Wendelin has already defeated dragons before. However, Brantag warns them that fighting several dragons at the same time is a completely different matter. Everyone desperately tries convincing Kurt not to use the flute, because he could end up dying as well. However, Kurt coldly replies that he would never use something capable of harming himself. He He then reveals that he no longer cares if the dragons destroy the village because the villagers completely abandoned him. Kurt even declares that if necessary, he will simply build an entirely new family from scratch. Suddenly, Wendelin makes a quick movement, causing Kurt to instantly threaten them by preparing to play the flute. While the argument continues, Brantag secretly casts a spell in an attempt to destroy the flute. However, the magical artifact completely resists the attack. This immediately enrages Kurt, causing him to begin playing the flute. At that exact moment, the sky suddenly turns dark while evil spirits begin emerging from the ground itself. Brantag immediately tells everyone that it seems suspicious from the beginning for Kurt to possess a dragon-taming flute. He then reveals the truth by explaining that the man completely deceived Kurt. According to Brantag, the artifact is actually called the Flute of Resentment. Whoever plays it can summon evil spirits to destroy their enemies. However, the flute also carries a terrible curse because anyone who comes into contact with the spirits will eventually become an undead monster themselves. While playing the flute, Kurt begins thinking about all the hatred he feels toward Wendelin, and how nothing in his life has ever gone the way he wanted. Soon after, the evil spirits completely surround Kurt, and suddenly a gigantic monster is born from the massive concentration of hatred and resentment. At that exact moment, Brantag urgently tells Wendelin to use sacred magic because Kurt is already dead. Hearing this leaves Wendelin completely shocked. The monster immediately launches a massive attack against them, but Elise blocks it using her sacred magic. She then declares that she will personally handle the purification from this point onward. However, because there are simply too many spirits and their power is overwhelming, Elise slowly begins getting pushed back by the monster's strength. Seeing this, Wendelin immediately rushes to help her. He reminds Elise about how they combined their sacred magic before inside the Forest of Evil, and suggests doing the same thing again. Finally, the two combine and amplify their purification spell together, completely destroying the monster once and for all. The moment the monster disappears, the flute falls onto the ground in front of them. At the same time, Kurt's soul can be seen separating from the opposite side of the battlefield. Kurt's spirit then travels directly toward Rugner, who is in the middle of celebrating during a party. The moment the spirit arrives, it immediately attacks everyone inside without hesitation. Several hours later, we see Wendelin and Roderick standing outside the place that was attacked. Roderick explains that Rugner, 12 nobles, and even many of their family members all died during the assault. They also begin worrying about Amelie because she can no longer live peacefully after everything that happened. Many nobles and other people now hate her simply because she was Kurt's wife, forcing her to hide inside Herman's house for safety. A little later, Armstrong, Brantag, and Wendelin gather together to discuss the situation. They explain that they still cannot determine where the cursed flute originally came from. Brantag even mentions the possibility that the entire incident may have secretly been part of the royal palace's plan from the very beginning. Wendelin then admits that he is exhausted by everything that has happened and says that he no longer even understands what it truly means to be a noble. At that moment, Brantag calmly tells him not to overthink things because Wendelin is already a true noble deep inside, not simply because of his family name or the wealth he gained. Those words remain in Wendelin's mind throughout the entire day. Later that evening, he quietly asks Elise whether he truly seems all right, because he feels completely lost and disconnected from reality. Elise gently replies that many times she cannot understand what is happening inside his mind. Even when she is standing close beside him, she still feels as though he is emotionally very far away. The girl then places her hand over his, causing Wendelin to quietly reflect on everything. After thinking carefully, he finally declares that from now on he will become a proper and honorable noble. Several days later, we see Wendelin kneeling before the king. The king officially proclaims him as the new heir and ruler of the Baumeister domain. Wendelin formally accepts ownership of the territory, after which the king asks him if there is anything else he desires now that he must fully develop and govern the land himself. Wendelin tells the king that there is one thing he would like to request. Because of everything that recently happened, many nobles died, and now distant relatives will begin appearing to claim their titles. For that reason, Wendelin asks for permission to personally assign 2 noble titles himself in order to properly help develop the Baumeister domain. This request shocks everyone because nobody expected Wendelin to ask for something like that. The king immediately responds by saying that only the crown has the authority to assign noble titles. Because of this, Edgar and Lubner begin arguing about Wendelin's proposal. One side believes the lands should be distributed to other nobles, while the other insists that Wendelin is absolutely necessary for developing the territory. The argument quickly causes unrest among the nobles. Soon after, Armstrong loudly tells everyone to calm down before turning toward Wendelin and asking him to withdraw his request. However, Armstrong then cleverly tells the king to listen to Edgar's suggestion instead. He proposes allowing Wendelin to keep part of the territory while the remaining lands could be handled separately. Everyone becomes shocked after hearing this because it was an incredibly smart political move on Armstrong's part. Soon after, the king becomes tired of all the arguing and declares that Armstrong will remain in the capital. He then announces that Wendelin will personally oversee the development of the territory. At the same time, the king indirectly reveals that he intends to approve Wendelin's original request regarding the two noble titles. Armstrong then secretly winks at Wendelin, revealing that the entire argument was simply a performance meant to push the king into granting his request. Finally, the king officially announces that he will allow Wendelin to grant those two noble titles himself. Immediately afterward, he promotes Wendelin and proclaims him as Count Wendelin von Baumeister, so he can continue developing the territory properly. Everyone in the room becomes completely shocked after hearing the king's decision. Wendelin then kneels down, places his sword before the king, and swears that he will use it to protect both the king and the people of the kingdom. The following day, Wendelin meets together with Amelie and Elise. While watching Amalie's children, Wendelin explains that once they become adults, he plans to grant them the two noble titles given to him by the king. This makes Amelie extremely happy because her children would have otherwise lost their noble status completely. Thanks to Wendelin's decision, they will still remain part of the nobility in the future. Amelie sincerely thanks him, and shortly afterward Wendelin and the others leave the area. In the next scene, we are shown the same opening scene from the beginning of the anime, where Wendelin defeated the undead zombies, flattened the land, and helped the villagers begin working on the territory. Soon after, Wendelin tells Erwin and Roderick that they are finally leaving. However, they remind him that he still needs to continue using his magic to expand the land even more. Wendelin reluctantly accepts because he now needs to build new territory for several nobles. This became necessary after the nobles agreed to allow him to distribute the noble titles himself. A little later, Wendelin pulls out several blueprints from his pocket, revealing that he plans to create a soy sauce and miso factory under the Baumeister name.